Let's call this first part, The Customer is Always Right. As an author, it's really easy to think that people read your books and experience the story that you intended to tell. That's a nice thought, but it doesn't hold on to reality. All too quickly, you can discover that readers are having a very different experience when you start talking to them. The best example of this that I have happened at a convention. This fellow comes up to me to tell me how much he enjoyed Barsk the Elephant's Graveyard. Well, like most people, I enjoy having my ego stroked, and honestly, I'm very proud of that book. So to have a complete stranger come up to me, having identified me somehow, and gush about how brilliant the book was and how it changed his life and yada yada yada, sure, that wasn't hard to take at all. But then it got a little weird. He started telling me how Barsk was this incredible allegory about Nazi Germany. Huh. Well, sure. I think Barsk is about, among other things, intolerance. Clearly, the elephants are a stand in for some serious issues that I'm using anthropomorphic animals as a metaphor to talk about, and how we're still very good at treating one another so very badly. Like a lot of people, I have opinions about racism, but as a straight, overeducated white male, I don't have a lot of standing in discussing the topic, which was part of the thinking behind writing the novel in the first place. It's a classic device of using a science fiction metaphor to talk about something in the real world. But I wasn't expecting someone to come up and tell me that my novel was about Nazis. Sure, the whole metaphor can be about other forms of intolerance here, including religious intolerance. And yes, there is something in the novel that quite resembles a concentration camp, and a spoiler, almost everyone in the camp is killed in a rather grisly manner. But I think that's it. There's so much else going on in the book, and yet that's what they saw. That's where this person stopped. They weren't intrigued by the notion of a subatomic particle of personality that allows you to talk to the dead. They weren't captivated by prophecies from 800 years earlier, or the dead matriarch reaching out to manipulate people in the present time, or even the idea that no one thinks of themselves as a villain, and how all the villains in the book deliberately embrace the notion that the end justifies the means, and they can rationalize those means, no matter how extreme they may get. To say nothing of all the other themes and ideas that are in the book. Nope, nope. What they glommed onto was that the book was an obvious allegory for Nazi Germany. And here's the thing, what I think doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, any novel is a subjective experience. It comes down to the interaction between what the author put on the page and what the reader takes away. I could have argued with this reader till I was blue in the face that he had gotten it completely wrong, but it wasn't my place to do so. He'd read the whole book and by the end had reached the conclusions that he did. For him, the bit about Nazis was valid and true. It doesn't matter that I think he was completely wrong or that I hadn't intended any of that. All of that is moot. He'd plunked down his money, read the book, and reached a conclusion. He'd had an experience. Moreover, he'd had an enjoyable experience. He liked what he'd read. He'd been intrigued by it, come up to me and told me he'd found it fascinating, praising my abilities as an author. But he didn't read the book that I wrote, if you follow me. Well, at the convention, this reader and I chatted a while, and then he went away, thoroughly content, happy to have had a one-on-one meeting with the author of a novel he'd enjoyed. And I went away realizing that once a book of mine is published, it stops being my book. And that was a very humbling realization. Something to think about. Over the last 4 years or so, I've been grappling with various medical travails involving two different kinds of cancer. And not surprisingly, on more than one occasion during that time, I've thought about my friend Jay Lake. Jay died sometime before any of that started for me, succumbing to his own cancer. During his career, Jay was extremely prolific. His writing speed was so impressive, his name became a unit of measurement, as in I was on fire. I wrote 3J Lakes last week. We were friends and colleagues, and even at various times, one another's editors. I wrote a piece for the anthology he co-edited, All Star Zeppelin Adventure Stories, and he submitted a novella for the first of my alembical anthologies. I contend that it was the best thing Jay ever wrote, a piece entitled America, Such as She Is. His story had a very literary feeling, and I was proud to publish it. But we had a major disagreement about the ending. I'm a traditional kind of writer myself. I like everything to be resolved. Good vanquishes evil, the hero wins, the villain is defeated and or redeemed. Basically, I want everything to be tied up with a neat bow. That doesn't happen as much in what people call literary fiction. I reminded Jay of this when I told him that the only reason I knew I'd come to the end of his novella was because there were no more pages to it. What he considered to be a satisfying ending could just as easily have been achieved, and to the same degree, if he'd stopped a page before, or even 2 pages before that. It helped that we were friends, because as you might imagine, we argued about this point a lot and loudly. It helped that he understood where I was coming from, but he disagreed. In the end, I think we went with his version, which was as satisfying as the other two options, but more interestingly for me as his editor, and a lesson that I took away from the experience as an author myself, was that in fiction as in life, things don't always end up wrapped up in a neat bow, and not to ask why, but rather that sometimes the better story is to ask yourself, why not? And also, what does it look like? When you do that, a new question opens up, and you start asking, where do you actually want to place the ending? And what does that decision do for you? That question became a compelling metaphor in and of itself, one that I often think of when I think about my friend Jay and reflect how he was taken from us far, far too early. Not sure if you're going to care, but what the heck? Here's a Klingon word for you. That word is mek'leth. And this is what a mek'leth is. Think of it as one half of a batleth. This one is, well, I think it's a solid steel, folded like, an old traditional uh, Japanese blade. It doesn't have an edge because it's dangerous enough as it is, and the handle is made up, you can see, many, many rings of lacquered buffalo hide. It was presented to me many years ago as a token of appreciation for my work with the Klingon language. And it rarely leaves my home because, as you can imagine, it would not play well with the folks at the TSA. So it sits in a magazine rack next to my chair here. And I glanced down, I saw it, and I thought, hey, let's share it with the folks at home. So there you go. Mek'leth. Just a bonus piece of Klingon trivia for you.